Okay, today we're going to be learning about how to add and subtract integers using chips. So first, let's do a quick review on how we can decide if an integer is going to be positive or negative. I have a bunch of examples here at the top of your notes, and I want you to make sure that you're underlining the keywords with me as we go over it. Number 1 talks about a profit of 250. 2 says 18 degrees below 0. 3 says a loss of 8 yards. And 4 says an elevation of 3,400 feet. Numbers 5 and 6, we are ordering from least to greatest. So now I want you guys to go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to try to write an integer for each of those numbers 1 through 4, and then order those numbers from least to greatest. And remember, think about a number line if you get stuck. All right, so looking at my answers, I just want to point out a couple of the tricky ones. Remember, if we talk about profits or elevations, those are positive answers, such as numbers 1 and 4. And numbers 2 and 3 both talk about negative integers. Below 0 and losing yards would be turning that integer to a negative. For numbers 5 and 6, watch out, because those negatives, as you get a bigger number attached to the negative, that actually means that you have a smaller integer. So those bigger negatives are going to be listed first. All right, looking at adding integers, this is getting into that new information. We're going to talk about them using chips. So you can see that I have some of my chips right here. I've got a yellow circle with a plus and a red circle with a minus. The yellow stands for being positive and the red has a negative for me, but you can always make a key or just put the plus and minus in your circles to show it on your paper. So here I have an integer problem with words, and I'm going to pick out the important information. It says that I'm going to begin with 4 positive counters, and then I'm going to add 4 negative counters. So let's turn that into a number sentence. Well, if it's positive, I'm going to use a positive 4, a plus sign for add, and then I'm going to put negative 4. For those 4 negative counters. Now, this looks a little bit confusing because I have a plus and a negative sign that are super close to each other. So I can use a grouping symbol, a parenthesis, to keep that negative attached to the number. So I know what is a plus sign, what's a minus sign, what's a minus, what's a negative, all of those pieces. Those parentheses help make it more clear. So let's go ahead and find some pictures, and I want you to draw these with me as I'm doing it. So I'm going to pull 4 positive counters up into these boxes, and my counters are pretty big. Make yours work. And then I'm going to put 4 negative counters. Good. All right, now as we talk about positive and negative integers, we always talk about them as best friend groups. If I have a positive and a negative, those make a best friend, so I can circle them together. Now my positive and my negative counters, once they get together, if I have a positive and a negative number, we know from our properties that that makes a 0. Remember, that's the additive inverse. So each one of these that make a pair, a yellow chip and a red chip, a plus and a minus, turns into 0. And I always want to circle my 0 pairs. So I want you to draw a little arrow. This is called a 0 pair. Anytime you have a positive and a negative, it makes 0. So I circled all the pairs that I could, and I have nothing left. So my solution is going to be 0. All right, let's try one that's a little bit trickier now. If I have a positive and a positive, we're going to do an example. So I've got 3 positive counters. Then I'm going to add 6 positive counters. Whoops, that's positive, so I need to make sure that I highlight it in yellow. So let's go ahead and make my number sentence. That's going to be a positive 3 plus a positive 6. Now I know what this equals, but I will need to make sure that I know how to show it with chips. So I'm going to pull 3 over, and I'm going to really squish them together because my box is very small. So I've got my 3 positives, and then I'm going to pull over 6 more positives. And remember, you're drawing this with me. You got to make sure that yours matches mine exactly. So you can see that I've got 2 sets. I added my 2, my 3, and my 6 in that box. Now I'm looking for those 0 pairs. Well, I don't have any negatives, so I can't circle anything. So I'm going to go ahead and just, they're all left over. Nobody gets to leave. I got to keep them all in my box. If we don't have any 0 pairs, everything that we started with gets left over. So here I see that I have 9 positive chips, so my solution is a positive 9. So anytime you have a positive plus a positive, you're going to end up with a positive answer. Go ahead and fill in that blank. Now let's try it out with 2 negatives. So here I'm going to start out with 2 negative counters, and then I'm going to add 4 negative counters. This time when I write my number sentence, I'm going to write a -2 first, add a -4. Remember, I can keep my negatives with my number by drawing the parentheses. So I'm going to pull over 1, 2 negatives, and then 4 more negatives. And make sure you have all the circles I have. And now I'm looking for 0 pairs. I do not have any 0 pairs, so they're all left over in my other box. So I've got 1, 2 from the first number, and then 4 from the second number. And that makes 6 negatives, so don't forget that negative sign. So if I add 2 numbers that are negative together, I end up with a negative answer. All right, now we're going to really shake things up. This time we have a mixture of positive and negative answers. So I've got 3 positive, and then I'm going to add 6 negative. So let's make that number sentence. I'm going to use a positive 3 plus a negative 6. So as I pull over these chips, I got to make sure that I'm using yellows for my positive and reds for my negatives. And if you have different colors in your key, that's fine. Just make sure that you're clear. Or if you're drawing these circles in your notes, you got to make sure you have that plus or that minus so I know which one's which. Now I'm looking for those 0 pairs. Well, I see one best friend group. This is a 0 pair. Here's another one. And there's my last one. And now I'm all out of positives. So now I'm looking at what's left over. Well, I have 3 negatives that didn't have a best friend. So they're stuck in my box over here as my answer, which means that my solution is a -3. Now we're going to pause the video, and I want you to try out that last box on our notes. Make sure that you're writing out your number sentence and that you have your picture to show. All right, looking at my drawing, I want you to compare it to yours. And here's the things that I need you to make sure that you have. First, make sure that your number sentence is correct. And then in your picture, I need you to make sure that you have all of the 0 pairs circled. We need to have them circled in the picture. And then I have 1 left over, so my solution to -4 plus 5 is 1. All right, next we're going to really change things, and now we're going to talk about subtracting. So in subtracting, we have 2 different scenarios, and you're going to see that show up in our notes. Let's try out our first example here. I'm going to start out with 5 positive counters, and then I'm going to take away 3 positive counters. Now, when I make this number sentence, you're going to see that this is something that I know how to solve. I know that 5 minus 3, I know what that answer is, but now I have to show it in my pictures. So what I'm going to do is you'll see that there are 3 boxes here, so really pay attention to what's happening as I pull over my counters. My first box is how my number sentence starts. So I have a positive 5. So I'm going to put my 5 positive counters from that first integer in my first box. Now in my next box, I'm going to show what the problem tells me to do. Well, it says that from those 5 counters, so I've got to start with that, I'm going to take away 3 of them. The way that we show taking away counters or these chips is that I need to circle the number that I'm going to take away, and then I'm going to draw an arrow going out of the box. That shows me that I'm going to be taking away those 3 counters. So now I'm looking at what's left over. Well, I've got 2 chips that stayed in my box, did not get left, that did not get taken away. So my solution is a positive 2. Now I want you to go ahead and pause the video and try out this next box. Now this can get a little bit tricky, so look at your example problem to help you out, and we'll check once you go through it. All right, so looking at my answer and comparing it to your own, I want you to make sure that you put those parentheses around that negative with the 3, so we make sure that it's separate. And in your picture, you've got to make sure that you have the 3 negatives circled, getting taken out, and then you have the correct answer left over. In both of these examples, there were enough chips from what we started with to take away the ones that they told us to take away. Now we're going to see what happens what happens when there are not enough chips. So looking at this example, we're going to begin with 4 positive chips, and then we're going to take away 3 negatives. So let's make that number sentence. Well, I'm going to start out with a positive 4, and then I'm going to subtract those 3 negatives. So let's put our beginning number into that first box. So this is a positive number, so I'm going to use my yellow chips. I'm going to put 4 yellow chips in my box. And now I need to show taking it away. So first I have to show what I started with, those 4 positives. And now I have to take away 3 negatives. But the problem is that I don't even have any negatives to take away. So if I'm going to invite negative chips to my party, I've got to bring in extra people. And my box is going to get pretty crowded, but pay attention to what I'm bringing. If I bring this negative over, he's going to bring his best friend. And remember, we talked about how my positive and my negative chips make a best friend group. So I need another one because I've got to kick out 3 negatives. So he's going to bring his best friend too. And now I've got another one that I need, and he's going to bring his best friend. Now this is a pretty crazy party in that middle box, but I've still got to show me taking away those 3 negatives. So I'm going to circle only those, not even their best friends, and draw an arrow going out. Now I've got to find out who's left at my party. Well, I had the 4 from the beginning. There's my 4 from the beginning. And then I have to show those 3 best friends that tagged along but got left when the negatives left. So 1, 2, 3 more. So my solution, that difference, is actually a positive 7. Now this is a little bit tricky because I ended up with a bigger number even though I took chips away. But remember, I had to invite those negatives in order to kick them out. Now I want you to really try the next one. Pause the video, draw out your pictures. Don't forget, when you invite those chips that you don't have, you need to also invite their best friends. And we're going to check once you've tried it out. All right, so in comparing yours to mine, this was really a tricky problem. The subtraction gets difficult. So make sure that you have those 2 negatives in that first box, because I started out with 2 negative counters. And then when I found out that I had to take away 4 positives, I knew that I had to invite them to the box. But they did not come alone. They want to bring their best friends. So I brought 4 positives, and then I also invited those 4 negatives. You can see them here. And so when I kicked out those 4 positives, I was left with the 2 from the beginning and then 4 more negatives, which made 6 negatives as my solution. So now we've got one last blank. It says when there are not enough chips, you have to what? So as I look at both of these, I found out that when there were not enough chips, I had to invite more with their best friends. And I'm using BF best friends to shorten up my notes. So remember, if there aren't the right chips that we need, we can always add more, but they have to bring their best friend. That's super important. All right, we are going to get a chance to practice this a lot, but you have to make sure that you have complete notes. So if you need to go back into the video and rewatch, fill it in, that's fine. Do that.